Good morning and happy Tuesday. I am back and took a couple days off for the holidays. I hope that everyone had a lovely holiday break and that you're looking forward to the new year and another long weekend coming up. Today, I want to talk about use and occupancy agreements, what they are, when they're used, and how they work. So, oftentimes, I have new contracts that come into my office, and if I represent the buyer, they'll let me know that the seller is looking to stay at the property for another month or 2 months after closing. Sometimes I have sellers. They call me and they tell me, hey, I want to close on X date, but I need to stay in the home for 30 days because the home that I'm moving to isn't going to be ready for a month after closing, so I need to stay at the property. That's usually how the issue is presented. It's someone has to stay in the home after the closing. You can sometimes have situations where someone's moving into a home before the closing, and a use and occupancy would apply in that situation as well. What it is it is a short-term contract that is not the same as a lease, right? It's more like a license agreement. You are being given the opportunity to use the space, to live in the space, whether you're the seller or the buyer moving in early. And you don't have the same rights as a tenant would in a landlord-tenant situation. It's a lot slimmer. Like, your protections as a tenant are a lot slimmer than if you were to have an actual lease agreement. There is a cost ordinarily applied, and that cost gets factored into the use and occupancy agreement. Usually it's a daily rate, and if someone's staying for a month at a time, there would be a monthly rate, but quite often it gets broken down into a rate based on the day. And typically, the person who is being paid, which would be either the buyer if the seller is staying, or the seller getting paid if the buyer's moving in early, the rate that gets charged per day should be enough to cover your holding costs, but not make a profit for you. So you're not really supposed to be making money off of the use and occupancy. It's just to cover you so that you break even while you are waiting for your next home to be available, or while you're allowing the buyer to move in early. So there's often a deposit that gets held that is alike a security deposit, but it is a protection deposit that gets held by the attorneys or the title company after the closing. And the purpose for that is, especially when the seller remains on the property after closing, the buyer doesn't really have a chance to do what's called their final walkthrough. They should do a walkthrough, but they're not going to be able to see everything because the seller's furniture will still all be there. They're still living there. Also, what if damage happens to the property while the seller still lives there? After the closing, right? The buyer now owns the property and will be stuck with it if there's no deposit held to protect the buyer from any damage caused by the seller who's now living in the property that the buyer now owns. So that deposit, it's an escrow, and it's normally a large number. It's a lot larger than a security deposit on a rental. You can see numbers anywhere from like $5,000 to $10,000 depending on how long the use and occupancy agreement is for. So those are just a few things about use and occupancy agreements. They get drafted by the attorneys and signed by the buyer and the seller. And it's important to make sure that that agreement is in writing and that it has everything in there that might need to be, tightened up after the closing. So if you have inspection issues that are not yet repaired but need to be repaired while the seller remains in the property after closing, you want to loop that in there. There's a lot of different things. And for realtors, when you have clients that you know are going to need this use and occupancy, it's important that you talk to your attorney about that when you give them the contract. So give them a call, let them know that this is a situation where the seller needs to stay after closing. If you represent buyers, make sure that you make a note that they should have a final walkthrough, that they should never close, even though the seller is staying at the property, without doing a pre-closing walkthrough to make sure that the buyer knows at least where the property stands as of the date of closing. So that's that for today, and I will be back with another video tomorrow. Have a wonderful, blessed day.